Hi guys, so I'm doing this first, although it's a little bit the wrong way around. On Friday we will discuss the rest of trade publishing, but I just thought that we don't have a lot of time, so I would rather have you guys watch this about the pest environment and the pest factors, and then on Friday we can do a quick recap and talk about the other things that I'd like to cover about trade publishing. So alright, so if this seems a little bit out of place, just understand that we are looking at trade publishing within the pest environment or the pest factors. Now, first of all, just quickly to contextualize, is that trade publishing is the books published for the man on the street, the general consumer. So it's not educational publishing, it's not books published for learning or for, part of the school syllabus or the Department of Education. It's also not academic publishing where you publish books for the tertiary market and for students. These are books that are published for the man on the street, your general consumer. It has fiction, non-fiction, adult and children as their audiences. So just have that in the back of your mind as we continue with this presentation. So the pest analysis usually has the political factors, economic factors, your social factors, and your technological factors. And all of these comprise basically your macro environment, and these things also have an influence on your publishing industry and your publishing company as a whole. So we're going to go through all of these elements and just discuss how these things affect trade publishing specifically. So in your political environment, you all know what a political environment is. Basically, you need to understand what kind of legislation and tax laws and any kind of policy making is involved in your political environment and how this actually influences you as a publishing house. So that can be stuff like censorship as well, apartheid, the Bantu education, all of these things, the language policy, etc., etc. The problem with this is also that we have few government reading initiatives. So there's not a big drive from government side to actually promote and encourage reading, or to break down the stereotype of reading that is basically the white elite and it's only a selected few in the country. There are some of these government initiatives that have started in reading programs, but none of them have really been very successful or have been sustained or managed or maintained, or there was usually a lack of funding or they didn't have enough resources. So that's usually a problem, that they do start a lot of these things, but then they're not necessarily always continuing as they are supposed to. There's also issues with our book policy. So each country has their own arts and culture division within the parliament or within the governmental structure, and then there's usually something like the book policy, and the book policy will talk about books and language inclusion and how everything works in all the kinds of plans and initiatives that relates to book publishing and the book publishing sector in South Africa. Now, unfortunately, there are various issues with it. So previously that position was open for quite some time. So because there is no one taking care of it, there's obviously no attention that people give to it. The problem also with that is there can't only be one, as you need a whole committee to do certain things and implement policies. So that is obviously a huge problem. The other thing that you also need to be aware of is, as I just mentioned, legal issues. So for example, if there's the VAT has increased from 14 to 15% and we charge VAT on books, immediately this makes the price of a book much more expensive, and we're already sitting in a country where people do not have a lot of disposable income, income that they can use for luxury goods like books. So this immediately increases the price, which makes our market so much smaller. There has also been a cut in library budgets. There's a whole historical thing about this, but basically what happened is that when the new government came into play, they basically cut down their spending on library budgets. And the problem with that is then your public libraries and school libraries, they don't have enough funds to actually purchase relevant or new or the latest edition books, or any books actually, and that makes it really difficult. So a lot of the libraries are actually getting their sponsorship or their funding from external organizations, private institutions. The government is not necessarily giving enough funds. So there are giving some funds and contributing to it, but there's not a huge drive towards actually increasing libraries, increasing the infrastructure to access to books, because that's another problem. People who would love to read, they don't have the money, but then the problem is also that then they don't have access via libraries, because at least with via libraries, some of them have free membership, some of them have a membership, but it's really not expensive. It is inexpensive, which means at least people can then still get books. They can take out books and read in their own time, without actually ending up buying a book for 200 or 300 rand. But now the fact that we have less and less libraries also makes it impossible. And also there are not a lot of libraries in rural areas. So that's another problem. So the infrastructure of libraries should be revamped actually, or improved. Improved is actually the right word. There has been some new development. So like the last decade or so, we've really seen interesting, innovative strategies that publishers and booksellers have actually started with, like the mobile libraries, where they get a mobile library like a little truck or a little bus, and it's stocked with books, and then they drive to rural areas or to the areas where there are no libraries. They park it, and people can come, and the community's kids can come and look at the books and take out books, etc., which I think is a genius idea. There has also been corporate sponsors and publishers and NGOs all teaming up to get donations for libraries, and to get them the funds, or to build libraries actually in areas where there are disadvantaged schools or areas. So once again, from our private sector, there has been a lot of help and initiatives. The big problem with this political environment as well, in terms of trade publishing, is we need to create a desire for South African content, locally as well as internationally. And if that drive doesn't come from our government, we need to look at external environments and private companies to actually do this. But at the end of the day, because trade books rely on leisure reading, it's books for entertainment, it's not prescribed by schools, obviously there's a lack of it. So government would usually support educational material, the reading of school books, the textbook environment, etc. But when it comes to leisure reading, that is where the problem comes in. So with our economic environment, once again, it's very self-explanatory. It's all about money. Do people actually have enough money to spend on luxury goods? I mean, even if you think about yourselves, once you have covered your rent and your data for your phone and clothing and medicine or whatever is needed, and foods and beverages and petrol, do you actually have enough money left to buy books? Usually we have to save up to buy books, or sometimes it's impulse buys when we go to a book launch, etc. But only 23% of adult South Africans actually buy one book a year. So it's not only that 23% sounds like a lot, out of our population. Let's think, we have a 57, 58 or 59 million people in South Africa. So 23% of those actually buy a book. But if they buy a book, it's one book per year. There's not even 3 books. So it just gives you an interesting statistic about our book buying and reading culture, and that's including academic textbooks. So there's a strong competition, obviously, from our multinational publishing houses. Those are the ones like Penguin Random House, Macmillan, Oxford University Press, Jonathan Ball is importing all of the UK publishers' books. So there is a huge competition with that, which also makes it difficult for us as a local publishing industry, because we have to fight off this competition all the time from international book suppliers, where we would rather want to produce our own books and sell our own books and basically contribute to the economy then of our country by way of producing local content. There is a monopoly of publishing and media companies and bookstores. Once again, we don't really have a equal division of bookseller chains. We have exclusive books, we have bargain books, we have CNAs, but I mean, there are a lot of these little independents, but they can't necessarily fight the larger companies or the bigger media groups like Naspers and CNA. Our internet sales are increasingly important because it gives us an alternative distribution channel or method. A lot of people are also buying online. Even now, we saw this with COVID and the coronavirus, where people really started to use the courier services more often, buy online. There's a whole culture behind that. Our bookshops, the other problem as well is that our bookshops are usually centered in urban affluent areas, usually in the malls. And once again, there's a large part of our population that doesn't necessarily frequent malls or, go to these places in order to reach a bookshop. So the bookshops aren't necessarily located in all the areas where they are supposed to be. And the problem also is from a publishing side is that booksellers demand between 35 to 48% discount on titles. That's now for trade titles, and then usually they buy it on sale or return basis. When we go through the book selling and distribution PowerPoint presentation, we'll talk about this more. But yes, your booksellers do require a large discount percentage, which really makes it difficult if you already think that tax is paid on books and you have to also pay discounts to a bookseller. What are you actually in the end left with in terms of profit? But there are ways and means. Don't get discouraged. There are ways and means. You'll see when you do costing in third year. But it's just important that you guys just consider this and recognize these challenges.